Welcome to the 5 for 2 podcast with me, your host Adele, where we say no to careers where you're trading 5 days of misery for 2 days of fun. A place we discuss all things career, confidence, and money moves. I want to motivate, teach, and empower ambitious women to achieve more, earn more, feel more confident, and enjoy the work they do. It's all about believing you can have everything you want in your career and then going and getting it. So if you're ready, let's get into it.
Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode. I'm actually very excited about this episode because it affects a lot of people in my life and also a lot of you that are listening. It's been something that has come into my world a lot more in the last year, and I've been speaking to a lot of you about, and that is ADHD. I know so many of you have asked me to do an episode on this. You've asked me to interview people. And I feel like this is great timing. I feel like it was amazing alignment because I'd been thinking about it for a while. And then this person connected with me online. And then it just went from there. But yeah, let's get into it, guys. First and foremost, I want to introduce my guest, the lovely Skye Waterson, who is a former academic turned ADHD founder. And we're about to deliver an amazing episode. So yeah, buckle up, guys. Skye, hello and welcome.
Hi. Yeah, hi. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh no, I'm really happy that you're here. I know the listeners are going to get so much from this. But before we dive into the questions, 'cause I've got so many questions for you, tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us how you got to where you are, because I know you found out that you had ADHD later in life, which was really interesting to me because I feel like that's happening a lot lately. So tell the listeners all about you, how you got here. And then let's go from there.
Yeah, so I was ADHD my whole life, but I only found out when I was in my sort of early 30s at the beginning of my doctorate, which is a really strange time to find out. I went into a learning center thinking maybe I had dyslexia and feeling super burned out from my master's thesis. And when I went in, they did some tests and they said, "Hey, we think you have ADHD." And that was really interesting because I had been working in adult education for the past 6 years. I'd studied and taught in statistics, population health, and even developmental psychology, where we had touched on autism and ADHD in children, but it wasn't really discussed as something that adults could have at the time. And so, yeah, it was a real surprise for me and really threw me into my own independent research that is what started this whole organization, Unconventional organization, where I now consult, coach, and have a podcast talking about ADHD.
Oh, I love that. I love that you turned something that happened to you or something that a lot of people find a struggle or struggle to handle. I love that you turned it into something so positive. And also that you were able to thrive almost from getting your diagnosis. But I have a question about your diagnosis. How
Yeah.
did you feel when you first got the diagnosis? Because I know you said you went in and you thought possibly you had dyslexia. So you had a feeling that there was something. But how did you feel being older and sort of getting that diagnosis?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think, I've been thinking about this more recently because I've been writing about my diagnosis experience, and it was definitely interesting. I think initially I just wanted to know if there was something going on. I was a little bit up and down with my academics. So sometimes my writing was good. Sometimes I'd forget to read the back page of an exam or something, so I wanted to know what was happening. And so getting answers felt good. Like, okay, I know what's going on. But especially for me, I didn't really know anything about ADHD in adults at the time. And like I said, I was studying in developmental psychology, so it really shows you just how much information was out there, when I was diagnosed. And so it was one of those things where it was like initially relief and then some confusion, and then also a little bit of sadness, looking back through my past and realizing, oh, that career change wasn't because I didn't enjoy the area I was in. It was because I had ADHD and I was bored with the environment. And so that kind of thing, just realizing how much of my burnout, how many struggles I'd had were related to ADHD.
No, I really like that. And that's just made me think of something. I'm such a believer in everything happens for a reason and everything happens in its right timing. But
Yeah.
for people that are maybe just got diagnosed or going through the process or thinking that they might have ADHD, for you, is there anything you wish you knew or wish you had done differently after getting your diagnosis? Because I know you talked about sadness and you talked about how you felt. And I think you've ended up in such an amazing place. But is there anything you might have done differently or anything that you wish you knew beforehand that would have made you maybe do things slightly differently after you got diagnosed?
Yeah, I think honestly, probably the number one thing is I wish that I had gotten ADHD coaching sort of immediately.
Mm.
I didn't really know about it. It wasn't as much of a thing when I was, starting out. It was around, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And so I was very much kind of like, okay, I have this diagnosis, and because I'm an academic, I was like, right, I'm going to go on Google Scholar, and I'm going to go to the library, and I'm going to read everything I could, and it's great. I'm very grateful about it now because it means that I have done the due diligence to have the research-backed knowledge that provides the strategies. But I definitely did things the hard way.
It sounds like it, but it also sounds very, you lean more towards your academic brain. So because you're an
Yeah.
academic, you went that direction, which kind of makes sense. Because
Yeah.
as an academic, you would automatically be like, let me go and research, let me find information.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, ADHD coaching is definitely something that I've seen, like you said, a lot more in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think that coaching in general is so helpful. But when it's this niche, I think that's a really key thing. And do you think there are any sort of like groups or anything people should think about looking into or joining or being a part of?
Yeah, it's kind of a strange one, but honestly, just as a first pass, I would say go on Reddit, go on Facebook, and join an ADHD group that speaks to you. There's a heap of free ones, and
Cool.
some of them are better than others, obviously, but it's nice because you can post anonymously, and so you can kind of just dip a toe in there and say, "Hey, this is the thing that I'm struggling with no pressure. People are going to know anything about you."
I like that. That's really helpful. Now, I really like that. I've had, like I said at the beginning, I've had recently some of my clients, some of my listeners, and also people very close to me in my life be diagnosed with ADHD a lot
Mm-hmm.
later in life.
Mm-hmm.
One of my close friends, who is 40 years
Mm-hmm.
old, has only
Yeah.
just had a diagnosis,
Wow.
and took it really hard, almost avoided it at first. And I know she won't mind me speaking about this.
Yeah.
But she then sort of accepted it and was like, she said to me, there was such a big realization looking back through her career of,
Mm. Yeah.
oh, this all makes sense. It wasn't even that the reason why she found it hard was she didn't want the label. But then after she got past the being fearful of the label, she realized that actually the diagnosis actually helped her like look back and be like, oh my gosh, like it all makes
Yes.
sense. Like
Yeah.
I'm not, nothing's wrong with me. I'm not broken. I'm not weird. Because for a long time she was feeling like, why can everyone else seem to do things that she can't seem to do? Why can everyone else
Yes. Yeah.
concentrate when she can't seem to concentrate? A big one for her that came up was, why do I seem irresponsible? Like she would say, I know that something
Mhm.
needs to get done, but I don't
Mhm.
do it. And I know it's going to
Yeah.
let other people down, but I still don't do it. Something's wrong with me. Like, but she said once she got her diagnosis, it was almost like, oh, it's not that something's wrong with me, it's that my brain works differently. Like, and that was
Yes.
really helpful for her. So I think my next question for you would be, what are some like common misconceptions in the workplace maybe, or just in general, that people
Mhm.
have about other people with ADHD or that people themselves have? Like, what are misconceptions that you sort of maybe you hear a lot of? Like you're like, yeah,
Mhm.
that's a common misconception. Are there any that you can
Yeah.
sort of think of?
I think that's a great question. And, your story, I totally understand that perspective of your friend. And it does remind me of one of the things that is a misconception, which is the idea that when you find out you have ADHD, you're kind of committing to everything being harder forever.
Mm.
Because, one of the main things that you find out when you have ADHD is how your brain works, that your brain works differently. And so that then allows you to adjust what is happening as much as possible. Sometimes it's not possible, but as much as possible, you can make adjustments to your environment so that things begin to feel more effortless, so that there is a bit less, frustration. And yes, there's still the dopamine deprivation, but you have some of those tools and strategies in place, to reward yourself at the beginning instead of at the end, for example, that are made specifically for your brain, that helps everything to feel like it flows better.
Yeah, no, I like that. Like just different way. Yeah, I like that because something I think my friend struggled with was she very much was like, I don't want this label because now it's like an excuse for me to do things wrong. And I was
Mhm,
like,
mhm,
but it's not an excuse. Your brain actually works differently. And my thought was this: if someone was sick in the sense of like had cancer or had some other illness, or was like if you're short-sighted, sometimes
mhm.
like your teacher might help you sit up the front. It's not an excuse. It's
Yeah.
more of a reason to find other ways. Because I believe there's more than one way to do anything in life. And we all get taught one way and to be one way. And that sometimes is what hinders a lot of us because we're told to do things. Well, this is how you do things, or this is how you function, or this is how, I
Mhm.
don't know, you learn. And we all have to go to school and we all have to get this certain grade and we all have to do our career one way. So then when you're told that maybe your brain works in a different way, she felt like, oh no, that's an excuse versus no, it's not an excuse, but it's a reason why things maybe need to be adapted or you need to adapt. Do you think
Yeah.
yeah, go on?
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that that's very true, and it's about, being different, not being, so it's just about the idea that you're not necessarily going to be able to do things the way that they have been done, especially in one
Mm.
of those older organizations that are a bit more in their ways. But you're still going to be able to do things in a different way and do things really well. And that's where it can get really fun because everything feels intentional, everything feels balanced. You're going through the day feeling good about yourself. And that's really great.
Yeah, I really like that. Like, but yeah, doing things in a different way is a big thing for me, Skye, because I know you've listened to some of my podcast episodes,
Yeah.
but my coaching program is called Create Your Own Lane, and that's for a reason. Because I feel like
Hmm.
when we figure out how to do things our way, things get easier. We enjoy them
Yes,
more. We're happier, and whether it's ADHD or something else, when we find our own way, I just think life gets better, career gets better, everything gets better. So yeah, you
definitely.
saying that definitely just resonates with me as a whole, because I always feel like you should be looking for ways to do things your way to make them, like you said, enjoyable. And I think one thing I wanted to ask you was, I know there's not, I always know with anything like this, there's not one hard and fast rule. In life, there's not one
Hmm.
hard and fast rule. There are guidelines. But are there any signs that you think someone might present if they had ADHD that was undiagnosed later in life? Like, do you think there's any sort of maybe common threads, common signs? Like I said, I know that this is very wide and long reaching and everyone will present differently.
Hmm.
But are there any sort of common things? Because you work with a lot of people with ADHD and you speak to a lot of people with ADHD. So are there any
Yeah.
common things?
I think one that, maybe we don't talk about enough, but it was definitely true for myself when I was undiagnosed is, people with ADHD who are struggling can find themselves in a bit of an ADHD, of what they call ADHD burnout cycle, where you're kind of, doing something and you're pushing really hard, and maybe you're even, appearing to achieve a lot in an area, but it's taking a lot of your weekends, it's taking a lot of your time, and you're giving everything to this thing, and then, you find yourself burning out, and that's when people will find gaps in their careers, and then they'll be like, oh, well, this is just the wrong job, and they'll go do something else. And then the same thing will happen in that space. That sort of cycle, especially when you're talking jobs and careers, is sometimes an indication that there's something going on.
Okay, so like just a constant cycle of like burnout, but the person may be thinking it's the current industry or environment, and then they change and the same exact thing happens.
Exactly. Sometimes, they talk
Oh.
about this idea of ADHD burnout, and it's this idea that if you have, these executive functioning struggles, which is essentially what the ADHD is in many ways, you are managing with struggles in working memory, struggles in time blindness, and you don't even know. And so you'll be like, right, I have to like keep everything together. But then, something will happen, or you'll get older and you have more responsibilities, or you can't stay up
Mm,
until 3 a.m. like you did in your 20s and not get enough sleep. And so, that kind of thing can really start to pile up, and we can really struggle with burnout and just the sense
mm.
that, there's just too many things, and that's one of the reasons why people are getting late diagnoses.
That's really interesting. What you just said made me think, like, again, thinking about my friend, and I've got two friends that
Yeah.
were recently diagnosed, and she was like, sometimes it feels like she's got too many tabs open in her brain. Like, how
Yes.
you have, she would say to me, and that burnout cycle that you're talking about sounds really familiar, because she would just say to me, Adele, I feel like I've got so many tabs open all at one go, and I'm trying to
Mhm.
jump between all of them, and nothing's getting done. So
Yeah.
is procrastination potentially like, not everyone has procrastination, but I mean extreme procrastination. So like, one of my friends, she'll have like, it started off, she had like maybe 20 emails she needed to respond to, and she was like, oh, there's so many, I'll do it tomorrow. And then tomorrow became the week after, and then she ended up having like something like 1,500 emails, and she was like, there is no way I can get back to these. But it was like almost, but she knew some of them were super important, some of them were like
Mhm.
super important, but she knew that, and she could see
Yeah.
there was some, she could see the title, but it was like this extreme amount of procrastination, and she couldn't
Yeah.
understand why. Is that like a common thread for some people with ADHD?
Definitely, definitely.
Oh.
That it happens all the time. And that kind of thing can make it really tough because it feels like there's this big wall. Some people describe it as like it's just a physical discomfort with getting started. And a lot of that
Mm,
has to do with the fact that our bodies don't give us enough dopamine.
mm.
It's more complicated than that, but just for this, without going too hard into the neuroscience, that's essentially it. And so it's essentially meaning that our brains, if you're neurotypical and you need to start a task, then your brain will give you $5, you know what I mean? To kind of, help motivate you. If you have ADHD, your brain's going to give you $1. And so you don't necessarily feel as motivated. And, when you combine that with struggles with working memory, breaking things down, remembering the steps of a task, okay, I have to open the email, I have to find this, I have to find that. That kind of thing can make it feel really hard. And often when I work with clients, we talk about this concept that with ADHD, it feels like hard things are easy and easy things are hard. And that can be a real trip up for a lot of people in the workplace.
Ooh, I like the way you just described that. That really sat with me. Like the $1 and the
Mm.
$5. I've never thought of it like that, like, at
Yeah.
all. And I wonder if any
Yeah.
of my listeners have ever thought of it like that. I never even knew that was a thing. I never knew that it was to do with dopamine. I never knew it was to do with the starting, almost like,
Yeah.
just because I'm watching the Olympics at the moment, like coming out of the starting blocks, like
Hmm.
having all the energy to start sprinting versus, oh no, I've only got like the tank, like only half my tank
Yeah.
full, versus someone
Yeah.
who's neurotypical having a full
Hmm.
tank at all times to just to get started even. And I'm not
Yes.
saying everyone has a full tank at all times, but you know what I mean. It's that, like, that analogy that you gave, like that thought in my head, like I just pictured it like the $5 and the $1. It's like we're starting at different points, and that's
Yeah.
a really good way of looking at it. Like someone who is neurotypical is starting at a different starting point versus someone who has ADHD, or someone who has undiagnosed ADHD is starting, because whether you're diagnosed or not, it's still there. You still have the
Yeah.
ADHD. So you're starting at a different point, and understanding that for yourself, maybe. So any of my listeners that are listening, understanding for yourself that your tank just isn't as full, maybe. And
Yeah.
obviously, me and Skye are going to talk about this more, but there's potentially ways around it and things that you can do. And like Skye said, coaching is one of those things. Joining online groups is another one of those things, but like really understanding yourself so that you can work with what you have. I think that's really important as well. Being able to always work
Mm.
with what you have versus looking at, because I think for some people, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but for some people with ADHD, they might look at people that are neurotypical and be like, but you have something I don't have. So life is always going to be harder. And I think earlier you mentioned like you don't have to look at it like that it's going to be harder. You can look at it that it's going to be different.
Yeah, I think different is a great way of putting it because, when you have ADHD, you have different strengths and weaknesses.
Mm.
We've talked a little bit about the weaknesses, but there's also strengths of creative problem solving, original thinking. And this is something that people have found in the research. This isn't just me trying to make everyone feel better. We have these abilities to kind of think outside the box and come up with new ideas and think in different ways. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes you'll find people who have ADHD often on the edge of something. They're the ones who are ideating, and they're really great to have in organizations that have to problem solve a lot.
I love that you said that. And I'm going to say to everyone listening, I co-sign this because my friend who has been diagnosed, she is the most creative mind, I call her creative genius. The only thing with her is she won't always follow through. And we worked so well together through our career. And I mean that we got to heights in our career that we never thought we'd get to together because she would have the idea and I would be able to figure it out and make it happen.
Yeah.
And it was like a marriage made in career heaven. I can't even explain, but her brain, the way, if I see myself as a problem solver, I think, but when I'd go to her with a problem that I couldn't solve, the way her brain would work and she would come up with a solution within like seconds. And I would just look at her and be like, oh my gosh, you're so smart. And she'd be like, I'm not. And I'd be like, you are, because it's almost like her brain would see things in a different universe that I couldn't have ever thought of. And the concept she'd come up with would be so great that I would be like, hey, let's go and do that. Like it would just be this different level. And other people would see that in her too. They would be like, her mind was so creative. Her ability to problem solve was like second to none as far as I was concerned. Like I've never seen anyone like that. And obviously she only got diagnosed in the last couple of years, but this was years back when she would always be the creative mind. And I'd always be like to her, oh my gosh, you're such a creative mind. And she'd be like, no, but you're the problem solver. I'd be like, no, I'm the implementer. I will get it done. But I wasn't the one who thought about the concept necessarily at the beginning. So I would definitely say I co-sign the critical thinking that someone with ADHD has. And just being around people with ADHD. I think there are so many strengths, like you said. I think that even when you're neurotypical, people forget that even neurotypical people have strengths and weaknesses. It just is. So when we look at someone with ADHD, they have strengths and weaknesses too. And I think sometimes the diagnosis makes people think that there are only weaknesses when actually there are some amazing strengths that I've seen in people with ADHD that I could only wish that I could have, especially when it comes to things like the problem solving. Are there any other strengths that you think that you personally have that maybe aren't just to do with ADHD, but just your personal strengths? Because I think it will help just listeners to know that, like, your specific strengths.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you should say that. I can't remember the name of it, but I did one of those like strengths personality tests the other day.
Yes.
Yeah, or like how you implement, and that was really good because this is something I've been thinking about, especially as I move into more of a leadership role in my organization. I mean, I'm very much on the visionary side, so being able to come up with ideas, being able to problem solve, being able to explain. I think that was the most interesting one. Obviously, having an academic background, I'm able to go into depth, but also to simplify. When I was in academia, I was told my writing was not complicated enough and it was not passive enough. It was like too active. And I'm very grateful for that now because I write so much. And it's funny, I've had to sort of fall back in love with writing because I got so much flack when I was in academia for not being academic enough. And as a result, I thought I was a bad writer. So, getting back into that has been fun and rediscovering that I actually do enjoy it. But yeah, it's been interesting. I think everyone has these strengths and weaknesses, and that is the best way that I can describe ADHD is the idea of a spiky profile. If you have ADHD, chances are you're not just going to slot nicely into any space. There's going to be some spaces where you have these amazing strengths, but you're going to have those weaknesses. And I have the same. Like, I have a wonderful team who help me to implement my ideas, and they're a huge part of what I do. And I had, I hired someone to help with admin right from the very beginning. Because there are lots of strategies to support you in that, and I definitely do teach those. But it's always nice as well just to get some assistance if you can.
I love that. And that leads into my next question about getting the assistance, I think is really good. But also, I know everyone's different, but are there
Mm-hmm.
some jobs that are more suited to people with ADHD? And are there jobs that can people adapt their current roles?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a
Yeah,
two-part
people
question.
can adapt their current roles. One of the things that often people don't talk about enough is that if you can create a little bit of flexibility in your environment, um, that's a good starting place rather than changing careers, because changing careers will give you that initial burst of dopamine. Trust me, I know, I've done it a bunch of times. But after that, it really is about the environment. So if somebody is, first of all, I would say look at your environment, have a look at how much flexibility there is, learn about ADHD, think about things around, okay, where do you work best? Sometimes it's going to be in a coffee shop, sometimes it's going to be quietly, sometimes it's very rarely is it going to be in a loud room with lots of people, hot desking. But, think about that. And then also figuring out, okay, where is the space for creative thinking, for problem solving, for working on actually honestly hard things in your organization? We do hard things well if they interest us. The research indicates with ADHD we're very intrinsically motivated. So if you find that there is maybe you work in an organization that does some kind of sells pipes or something like that, and you're thinking, okay, this is a super boring organization, but maybe there's some kind of new type of material that's going to work better, and you're like, hey, let me spearhead that focus. I want to look into it. I want to see how much better it could make what we do, and I want to maybe give you the information, and then you guys can turn it into a final report, but I'm going to kind of do that initial outlay. That is really interesting.
Mm. See, I wouldn't have thought of it like that. That's really helpful. I feel like that's
Yeah.
really like just that shift, like so that it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't necessarily the company or the role, it was what you were doing within the role that
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily working, but you can still do things that will still help your company. And like you said
Mm-hmm.
about the flexibility and the adaptability, and I think, yeah, when companies are a little bit more rigid, that's a little bit harder. But are
That one
there
can be
any
tough.
things,
Yeah.
yeah, like when a company's really rigid, but are there any things that companies can do to support people with ADHD? And are there any roles that are just, I don't think anything's not suited to anyone. Like I don't know. I don't know if I'm just being too optimistic, but is there anything that isn't suited to someone with ADHD or something that they'd have to heavily adapt to
Yeah.
support them?
So a lot of people who come for coaching, sometimes they'll come and they have a job in sort of a government institution. And in
Mm,
that space, it can be really hard because not only is there very little flexibility, but there's also very limited usability in tech. And often
mm,
with ADHD, we're talking about how to make things easier. We're talking about things like, okay, well, could we use Google Tasks to set up your calendar? And if you're, using something from the Stone Age in terms of like, everything has to be done by hand and nothing will integrate with anything, and there's no way you can even use your phone. I mean, I've worked with multiple people who they're not even allowed to use their phone for clearance reasons, things like that. Sometimes, not always, I've worked with a lot of people who've found ways around that, but it's definitely the harder thing. And sometimes it can get to a point where you go, okay, maybe this one I should try something else, because I'm just constantly pushing up a hill, because there's just so little flexibility in this area.
yeah, that I could understand definitely. Like government roles,
Yeah,
here it would be the same. Like, yeah, I've worked in government roles as well, and it's a lot more rigid, and there is a lot less room for suggestion. Even so, even if you're saying like, oh, can I use this or can I try this? Like you said, some things are for security reasons, and other things are just like, no, this is how it's done. This is how we've always done it. You have to do it this way. Um,
exactly.
yeah, and I think, yeah, that makes total sense. Um, So as for you, I would love to know, how has your career changed post-diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful question. So for me, it was so clarifying to get the diagnosis, to understand how I work, to understand how things have been working for me. And post diagnosis, I was really, one of the things I'd struggled with in academia was finding something that interested me for a long enough period of time. I think partially understanding ADHD made me understand why that was happening, but also just it really gave me this motivation to help other people with ADHD. I was able to learn the skills and strategies, find out which skills and strategies I'd already been using that were helpful, which ones weren't. And one of the first things I did when I got my diagnosis was I actually started a inclusive learning center, postgrads with ADHD group, just so that I could talk to people who had ADHD like me. And that kind of turned into working in schools, teaching about this stuff once I had a certain amount of knowledge in it myself. And then eventually when COVID hit, it turned into what the organization is now. But a lot of it was just, it gave me a real focus for my research because it was so helpful. It was so impactful in a way that, unfortunately, in what I had been doing before, although it was super useful, it was hard to see those results as quickly.
Oh, I love that. That's super inspiring. I feel like anyone listening will be inspired by that, just because the way you've been able to turn it around and you found your diagnosis so helpful, and it
Hmm.
really helped you run in your career and to support other people. I think that's such an inspiring thing. So before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
What are 3 job search tips, or just some tips that you would help someone looking in this current job market who has ADHD?
Yeah. Well, true to form, I'm going to give you an environmental tip before anything else,
Okay,
and that's,
perfect.
I would say, the person, the you who is applying for the jobs, and then you who is actually pressing send on that email doesn't have to be the same person. So, what I mean by that is, if you can say, okay, I'm going to break this task down, I'm going to, spend today drafting up some applications, and maybe I'll listen to some music and I won't be, like 100% focused. I'll just kind of do it, as much as I can with some music on or a podcast on. And then maybe tomorrow I'm going to look at these applications, maybe with a friend if you can. And I'm going to double check that the spelling is good and double check that it's all good. And then I'm going to send it. And maybe I'm going to have a coffee and a chocolate biscuit to kind of get me through that bit. And that can help because often it can feel like the whole thing is very boring, but we can break it into separate parts to help with rejection sensitivity, things like that.
I love that answer. I love it because obviously your organization is called Unconventional, but the fact that I just love it because anything traditional I find really hard because
Yes.
I don't think things have to be traditional. I think that if you go down a traditional route, great. But I also think that people have to understand that there are so many other routes. And the fact that you
Hmm.
were just talking about doing your job search by having music on in the background, I was sitting here going to myself, that's not allowed, but in a joking way. Because I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
we're taught that everything has to be done in this specific rigid way. Like, oh, I'm job searching,
yeah.
turn off all the TV, focus on your
Oh
laptop,
gosh.
only do this. Like,
Never do
even
anything.
even me being neurotypical can't think of anything more annoying like having to do it in a set way, because some
Yeah,
days I am super traditional and I want
yeah,
to no noise, nothing, in a room by myself. Other times I want to be dancing, cooking and applying for jobs just because that's how I feel in that moment on that day. So I love that you just gave some tips that are very unconventional but also very effective, and you gave people permission, not that they needed it, but sometimes people need to hear it from someone else. You gave people permission
hmm,
to be unconventional. You
yeah,
gave people listening with ADHD permission to understand that your brain works in a different way, and being unconventional can still lead to the exact same success. And I don't know, I really love that answer. So thank you for
yeah,
that. I don't know, that just really sat with me. And I just really felt like, oh my gosh, you just gave so many people permission. You probably don't even realize how many people you've just given permission to do things their own way and get the results they need. Guys, I say this to you guys all the time that are listening. The reason I call my program Create Your Own Lane is because that is what you should be doing. Use what you have to your advantage. That includes your ADHD diagnosis. I want to thank Skye for coming and being on this episode, but I also want to ask you to share with the listeners where they can find you, how they can work with you, just all the things that are Skye.
Yeah. So you can find me at unconventionalorganization.com. You can find there, we have a podcast called the ADHD Skills Lab, where we talk about a lot more ADHD skills. So check that out if you like listening to podcasts, which you clearly do. And, we also have there access to a bunch of articles with strategies on, how to focus, how to get things done. They're all free. So check out unconventionalorganization.com if you want any of that material. And you can always, email me, contact us. There's lots of different ways to do that there.
Oh, I love that. And guys, everyone listening, I'm going to make sure Skye's contacts are in the show notes so you guys can reach out to her. You can connect with her. You can work with her, whatever it is that you want to do. Listen to her podcast. I think this has been such a helpful episode, and I thank you for connecting with me online and for joining me and for allowing me to interview and for you sharing your story with us. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for being with me and having this conversation. We really appreciate it over here in the 5 for 2 Careers community. And is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with before we go?
Yeah, I did have another strategy actually that I wanted to share, which is just what I was saying before, which is, thinking about the environment. Often we think I need the perfect career, but sometimes it's about focusing on the perfect environment for you. And sometimes that can kind of be as important, especially with ADHD. It's is it nice? Do other people going to be flexible? Will they let you use the cool, focus app that you've just figured out to help you get work done? That kind of thing is going to be super useful and often isn't thought about when you're thinking about these jobs. So yeah, definitely something to focus on. But other than that, you're doing good. You're probably working really hard, maybe even harder than you realize. So keep going.
Oh, thank you so much, Skye. It was lovely having you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. And I know so many of my listeners are going to head over to your podcast and start listening almost immediately after this.
Awesome.
So yeah, thank you so much. It has been lovely. Guys, thank you for tuning in as always. And I will be back soon with another episode.
I hope this episode gave you exactly what you needed and motivated you to confidently take steps towards your next career move. If you enjoyed it, screenshot and share it on your socials, tag me on Instagram, and come join my community of amazing women working on leveling up their confidence and career. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.